Admiral Valon of the Xylos Hegemony lived in a world of absolute crystalline perfection. In the Hegemony, life was defined by order, transparency, and, above all, purity. Their starships were not built. They were grown in sterile vacuum chambers, shaped into mirror-like hulls of diamond composite that had never known the touch of a single microscopic organism. To the Xylos, a germ was a mythological demon from the dark ages of their evolution. They had scrubbed their DNA, their air, and their very thoughts of any impurity millions of years ago. "Status report on Sector 7G, Valon commanded, his voice a series of harmonized hums. He stood in the center of a bridge so clean that even a stray photon felt like an intrusion. "We have located a biological anomaly in the outer rim of a minor spiral arm," the science officer replied, his skin glowing with a faint, sanitizing UV aura. "It is a Class 12 death world. It should be a barren rock, but it is infested." The view screen flickered to life, displaying a vibrant, swirling marble of blue, white, and a terrifying, aggressive green. To a human, it was Earth, a jewel of biodiversity. To Admiral Valon, it was a festering, rotting wound in the fabric of space. He watched with visible disgust as the scanners zoomed in on the Amazon rainforest. To him, it wasn't a forest. It was a trillion-ton mound of biological decay, a breeding ground for billions of invisible, self-replicating monsters. "It's not just the flora, Admiral," the officer continued, his voice trembling. "The dominant species, a bipedal carbon-based entity, is the host for a microscopic ecosystem so dense it defies our classification models. Each individual carries more unfiltered life than an entire star system in the hegemony. They breathe it. They eat it. They are composed of it." Valon felt a physical wave of nausea, a sensation almost unknown to his sterile race. The legends of the grave world were true. This planet is a biological error. If even a single cell from that world were to reach the hegemony, it would be the end of our civilization. Our immune systems, we don't even have them anymore. We outgrew the need for internal war. The Admiral's duty was clear. The hegemony's doctrine of universal hygiene dictated that any source of uncontrolled biological contagion must be neutralized before it could spread. To Valon, this wasn't an act of war. It was an act of cosmic surgery. You don't negotiate with a tumor, you excise it. "Prepare the atmosphere, strippers," Valon ordered, his primary sensory stalks twitching with resolve. "We will burn the impurities from this rock and turn it back into the sterile monument it was meant to be. We are doing the universe a favor." However, as the Xylos fleet positioned itself behind the moon, they made a fatal error. They assumed that because humans were dirty, they were also weak. They didn't realize that for 4 billion years, every single cell on Earth had been engaged in a brutal, microscopic world war. The humans weren't just infested. They were the ultimate survivors of a planet that tried to kill them every millisecond of every day. Just as the first stripper beam was about to fire, a small, primitive-looking vessel approached the fleet. It was a human diplomatic shuttle broadcasting a message on all frequencies. "Greetings, travelers. We are the people of Earth. We noticed your arrival and wanted to offer a gesture of friendship. We're coming aboard to say hello." Valen's heart nearly stopped. "Friendship? They are bringing the plague directly to our doorstep. Seal the docking bay. Activate all UV fields. If they so much as exhale, we are all dead." But it was too late. The human shuttle had already docked, and as the airlock door began to hiss open, the Xylos hegemony was about to learn that in a sterile universe, the most dangerous weapon isn't a laser, it's a handshake. The receiving bay of the Xylos flagship, the Pristine, was a cathedral of absolute sterility. The air was filtered through 12 layers of molecular sieves, and the floor was made of a self-sanitizing silver alloy that killed 99.999% of all known, to the Xylos, pathogens on contact. Admiral Valon stood behind a reinforced, triple-layered energy shield, encased in a pressurized biohazard suit that made him look like a crystalline insect trapped in a bubble. Around him, his elite guards held deatomizer rifles, their fingers twitching on triggers. They weren't looking for thermal signatures or armor plating. They were looking for spores. The airlock hissed, a sound that, to the Xylos, felt like the opening of a tomb. Out stepped Captain Artem Volkov. To his own people, Artem was a hero. A jovial, broad-shouldered man with a bushy beard and a smile that could melt glaciers. To the Xylos sensors, he was a Category 5 biostorm. "Greetings, friends!" Volkov boomed, his voice echoing in the silent, sterile chamber. He wasn't wearing a helmet, just a standard-issue flight suit. Inside Valan's helmet, the HUD was screaming. Red text scrolled so fast it was illegible. Pathogen detected, rhinovirus. Spore count, immeasurable. Unknown organic colony, Staphylococcus. Warning, host is 50% non-human microbiome. "Stop!" Valan's voice came through the speakers, distorted by terror. "Do not move another millimeter, entity. Maintain a distance of at least 50 cycles." Volkov stopped, looking confused. He wiped a bit of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, an action that caused the Xylos science officer to physically faint as billions of skin cells and salt-loving bacteria were launched into the air. "Oh, sorry," Volkov said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "I forget we're the new kids on the block. We humans tend to be a bit expressive. I'm Captain Artem Volkov, representing the United Terran Coalition. We come in peace." He stepped forward, intending to bridge the diplomatic gap. In a gesture ingrained in human DNA for thousands of years, he reached out his right hand. To make it more sincere, he pulled off his leather glove, exposing bare, warm, slightly damp skin. "In our culture," Volkov said, offering a wide, friendly grin, "we shake hands to show we carry no weapons." To the Xylos, this was like watching a man pull the pin on a grenade and offer it to them. Valan watched in slow-motion horror as Volkov's hand, a landscape of microscopic canyons teeming with trillions of predatory bacteria, moved toward the energy shield. "No!" Valan shrieked. Volkov, thinking the shield was just a window, pressed his bare palm against the energy field to show he was close to them. The shield, designed to stop plasma bolts and kinetic slugs, wasn't prepared for oils. The natural lipids and microscopic flora on Volkov's palm interacted with the high-frequency energy lattice. The shield didn't just flicker, it short-circuited as the impure organic matter caused a localized harmonic breakdown. A single microscopic droplet of Volkov's sweat, carrying perhaps 1,000 harmless Micrococcus luteus, drifted through the failing shield and landed on the polished floor of the pristine. The reaction was instantaneous. The floor's self-sanitizing silver, never having encountered a Terran superbacteria bred in the gutters of a death world, began to tarnish. The silver literally turned black as the bacteria began to feast on the metallic impurities. The ship's automated hygiene AI went into a recursive loop of despair, triggering the final sanitization protocol. "Evacuate!" Valan screamed, his internal HUD now showing the entire bay as a dead zone. "The Grave Worlders have breached the sanctity. They have weaponized their very skin." Volkov stood there, hand still extended, looking at the fleeing aliens with a look of utter bewilderment. "Was it the beard?" he muttered to himself. "I knew I should have shaved." Meanwhile, 3 decks up, the ship's primary ventilation system sucked in that single breath Volkov had exhaled. Within minutes, the most advanced warship in the hegemony began to smell faintly of old spice and peppermint. To the Xylos, it was the smell of the end of the world. The Galactic Council did not meet in a hall. They met in a hyper-sterile vacuum plenum. Each delegate sat inside a separate, lead-lined, UV-irradiated glass sphere. Since the incident on the Pristine, the galaxy had entered a state of total paralyzed terror. Admiral Valan's flagship had been scuttled, burned into a heap of molten slag by its own automated defense systems, because they couldn't figure out how to kill the peppermint-scented demons Volkov had exhaled into the vents. "The data is conclusive," High Purifier Sran announced, his voice vibrating through a series of ultrasonic transducers. "The species known as Homo sapiens is not a civilization. It is a planetary-scale infection. They carry within them a biological chaos that predates the first stars. Their world, Earth, is a festering petri dish of primordial violence." A holographic map of the Sol system materialized in the center of the plenum. It was draped in a pulsing, jagged red. "They consume cheese, which is literally controlled rot," Sran continued, his sensory stalks twitching with disgust. "They drink kombucha, a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. They possess immune systems, a permanent internal civil war that makes our most advanced planetary defenses look like child's play. If they are allowed to leave their system, the hegemony's purity is over. The galaxy will become moist." The Council's decision was unanimous and instantaneous. They wouldn't glass the planet. They were too afraid that the smoke from the fires would carry spores into the upper atmosphere. Instead, they authorized the Sol containment mesh. Within weeks, a fleet of 10,000 robotic constructors arrived at the heliopause of the Sol system. They began weaving a Dyson-style web of high-frequency energy emitters, a glass shield. It wasn't designed to keep the sun's light in. It was designed to keep the human filth from leaking out. Back on Earth, the United Terran Coalition was having a very different kind of meeting. "Let me get this straight," President Elena Vance said, rubbing her temples as she looked at the satellite feeds. "They aren't invading, they're building a fence?" "Essentially, ma'am," Captain Volkov replied. He was sitting in the Oval Office, nursing a cup of tea. He felt terrible. The alien admiral looked at me like I was a walking pile of toxic waste. I think my good morning may have caused a minor ecological collapse on their flagship. "We sent them our best scientists, our most peaceful diplomats, and a basket of organic sourdough bread," the Secretary of State sighed. "The bread was the worst part, sir," a junior analyst piped up, looking at the intercepted alien comms. "They flagged the yeast as an uncontrolled fungal invasion force. They think we tried to terraform their capital with a baguette." The humans watched as the glowing gold grid of the containment mesh slowly closed around their sun. It was the ultimate insult. Humanity had finally reached the stars, only for the stars to put up a "Do Not Disturb" sign and spray the porch with bleach. But as the final panel of the mesh clicked into place, the Galactic Council made a critical oversight. They assumed that by trapping the humans, they were safe. They forgot that humans were the masters of improvisation and fermentation. "If they want to treat us like a virus," President Vance said, her eyes narrowing as she watched the last gap in the shield close, "then maybe it's time we start acting like one. If we can't go through the front door, we'll find a way to leak through the cracks." She turned to her chief science officer. "How's the yogurt project coming along?" "Ready for deployment, ma'am," the scientist smiled. "We've engineered a strain of lactobacillus that can survive in hard vacuum and feed on energy shield frequencies. We call it the probiotic Trojan." The galaxy thought they had built a cage for a monster. They didn't realize they had just given a highly creative, slightly annoyed, and very dirty species a billion-mile-wide canvas to play with. The Purge-Legion of Gorgos did not believe in fences. To the Gorgos, a race of sentient, obsidian carapaced beings who viewed entropy and impairment as their only gods, the Galactic Council's quarantine was a coward's compromise. They didn't want to hide from the human infection, they wanted to incinerate it. "The Council cowers behind a golden web?" High Exarch Vrax hissed, his voice a series of dry, clicking vibrations within his diamond glass command throne. "But the Gorgos are the fire that purifies the void. We shall descend upon the grave world, burn the rot from its crust, and claim the silence for our own." The Gorgos fleet, 300 sanitization spires, bypassed the Sol containment mesh with a brutal application of spatial folding technology. They didn't care about the lactobacillus Trojans or the human protests. They exited warp directly over the Pacific Northwest of North America, a region chosen specifically because its high humidity and dense biomass made it the darkest heart of the rot on their sensors. The landing, Operation Whitewash, 2,000 Gorgos censure troops, touched down in a dense, rainy forest outside a small human settlement. They were the pinnacle of sterile warfare. Exo-sterile power armor, a seamless white ceramic composite that repelled all matter at a molecular level. Molecular integrity fields, shields designed to disintegrate any unauthorized organic matter within a 3-meter radius. Oxygen purifiers, massive humming backpacks that converted the toxic earth air into a pure, inert gas. Vrax stepped onto the mossy ground, his sensors screaming in agony. To a Gorgos, the forest floor wasn't just dirt. It was a war zone. Billions of fungi, nematodes, and bacteria were engaging in a silent, ancient struggle for decomposition. The ground, "It is alive," Vrax whispered, his primary mandible twitching. "It is eating itself. Activate the burn zone. Sanitize the perimeter." The Gorgos opened fire, but they weren't shooting at humans. They were shooting at the ground. Their white-hot beams of concentrated UV light scorched the ferns and boiled the mud, creating a small, charred circle of safety. The Battle of the Biofilm. A squad of human National Guard soldiers arrived 30 minutes later. They weren't wearing power armor. They were wearing camouflage fatigues, boots caked in mud, and, most terrifyingly to the Gorgos, they were sweating. "Drop your weapons!" Sergeant Miller yelled, his voice muffled by a simple cloth mask. He was nursing a slight seasonal allergy, and he let out a loud, wet sneeze. In the Gorgos HUDs, that sneeze was tracked like a MIRV nuclear strike. 10,000 droplets of moisture laden with human mucus and millions of highly evolved staphylococcus and rhinovirus strains drifted toward the Gorgos line. "Contagion detected!" The Gorgos AI screamed. "Integrity field overload!" The Gorgos molecular integrity fields were designed to handle plasma bolts and kinetic slugs, things with clear energy signatures. They were not programmed to deal with the complex, sticky proteins of human snot. The snot droplets hit the fields, clung to the energy lattice, and began to ferment. The unbreakable ceramic armor of the Gorgos began to pit and discolor. It wasn't a weapon that was killing them, it was the earth itself, microbial corrosion. Bacteria that feed on rare earth minerals found their way into the Gorgos joints, fungal spores. The damp, humid forest air carried spores that took root in the tiny maintenance vents of the alien life support systems. Rust. Within 10 minutes, the pristine white armor of the Purge-Legion was streaked with orange and black. The retreat of the bleached Admiral, the atmosphere it's hungry. Gorgos soldier shrieked, falling to his knees as his left leg joint seized up, fused solid by a rapidly growing colony of iron-oxidizing bacteria. "The armor is being digested. My filters are failing. I can smell." Vrax watched in absolute existential horror as his invincible army began to disintegrate. They hadn't even engaged the humans in combat. The humans were just standing there, confused, holding rifles they didn't need to fire. One soldier was even eating a ham sandwich, an act of such casual biological depravity that Vrax's mind nearly snapped. "Retreat!" Vrax clicked, his command frequency garbled by the moisture clogging his transmitters. "Back to the spires. This planet is not a world. It is a stomach." As the Gorgos fleet scrambled to leave the atmosphere, they didn't notice the stowaways. In the microscopic cracks of their sterilized hulls, billions of Earth's tiniest, most resilient citizens were settling in for the ride. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a vessel. And the Gorgos had just given the human plague its first lift to the rest of the galaxy. The Battle of the Pine Barrens had ended not with a bang, but with a wet, squelching whimper. The Gorgos Purge-Legion, once the terror of 17 star systems, was now a scattered collection of white-armored stragglers trying to find their way back to their landing spires. But the Earth wasn't done with them. The humidity of the New Jersey morning was 88%, and for an obsidian-based life form that required 0% moisture to maintain molecular stability, the very air was a slow-acting poison. In the ruins of an old suburban shopping mall, Sergeant Miller and his squad of cleanup specialists moved through the mist. They weren't there to kill. The United Terran Coalition had issued strict orders to capture as many Gorgies as possible for diplomatic leverage. "Target spotted! Behind the Starbucks ruins!" Miller hissed, signaling his team to fan out. They found a Gorgos vanguard, its armor now dull and streaked with green algae that had managed to take root in the ceramic pores within minutes of landing. The alien was slumped against a wall. Its breathing apparatus let out a wet, raspy rattle. Its molecular integrity field was dead, short-circuited by a combination of bird droppings and morning dew. "Easy now, big guy," Miller said, lowering his rifle. He felt a twinge of pity. The alien looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified. "We're here to help. Just gotta get you out of that suit before your oxygen runs out." Miller stepped forward and reached out. In a moment of pure human empathy, he took off his tactical glove to offer a gentle, steadying hand. He placed his bare palm on the Gorgos shoulder plate. To Miller, it was a touch. To the Gorgos, it was a nuclear meltdown. The natural oils on Miller's skin, the sebum, the lactic acid, and the trillions of Staphylococcus epidermidis acted like a concentrated solvent on the alien's hyper-pure ceramic. The moment Miller's skin touched the armor, the ceramic began to effervesce. It hissed and bubbled, turning into a foul-smelling black sludge. "Ugh, what the—" Miller pulled back, but the damage was done. The Gorgos let out a sound that bypassed the translation matrix. A high-pitched, vibrating shriek of existential agony. Where Miller had touched the armor, a hole had dissolved straight through to the alien's obsidian skin. But the touch was only the beginning. As Miller leaned in closer to see the damage, he exhaled. A single breath, warm and laden with CO2, and a microscopic hint of the pepperoni pizza he'd had for lunch. To the Gorgos, this was a concentrated biological gas attack. The alien's internal sensors went into a terminal biohazard lockout. Its skin, never having encountered a human pheromone, began to undergo a violent, systemic allergic reaction. The obsidian surface of the alien literally began to flake away, turning into dust as its molecular bonds were confused by the presence of human organic compounds. "Everyone back off!" Miller yelled, watching in horror as the alien literally started to melt before his eyes. "Don't touch them! Whatever you do, don't help them!" Across the planet, similar mercy missions were turning into massacres. Human medics trying to apply bandages found that the adhesive on the tape stripped the skin off the Xylos survivors. Human soldiers trying to offer water to thirsty captives accidentally poisoned them with the trace minerals and living microbes found in standard tap water. The realization hit the UTC High Command like a freight train. Humanity couldn't be diplomats because we were passive predators. Our very existence, our sweat, our breath, our shed skin cells, was a lethal chemical weapon to 90% of the known galaxy. We weren't just dirty, we were corrosive. In the Galactic Council's secret observation post, High Purifier Saran watched the death by hug footage with a cold, hollow dread. "They aren't even trying to kill us," Saran whispered, his sensors recording the mercy of the human soldiers. "They are trying to be kind. But their kindness is a solvent. Their love is a plague. If they ever decide to actually fight, the universe won't just fall. It will dissolve." The Gorgos Science Division, led by High Researcher Xylos 4, had successfully secured a small-town medical clinic on the outskirts of the combat zone. They didn't see it as a place of healing. Their sensors identified it as a Class S bioweapon forge. To a species that considered a single stray molecule of dust a security breach, a human hospital was a Lovecraftian nightmare, a temple dedicated to the cultivation of trillions of microscopic killers. "Look at the atmosphere," Xylos 4 hissed through his voice synth, his sensors twitching. "They spray the air with antiseptics, caustic chemical weapons designed to murder the weak microbes so only the strongest, most resilient superbugs survive. It's an evolutionary pressure chamber." The Gorgos team entered the pediatric ward. They found a 6-year-old boy named Tommy, currently suffering from a mild seasonal flu. To the Gorgos, Tommy wasn't a sick child. He was a biological supernova. "Scan the host," Xylos 4 commanded, deploying a high-resolution subatomic probe. The results that flickered across the Gorgos HUDs were enough to induce a systemic shutdown. Inside Tommy's bloodstream, a trillion-front war was raging. They watched in paralyzed horror as a human T-cell, a jagged, amorphous shapeshifter, cornered a virus cluster. The T-cell didn't just neutralize the threat. It consumed it, dismantled its genetic code, and then displayed the corpse to its allies to train them for the next slaughter. "It's not just a defense system," the junior researcher clicked, his carapace turning a sickly gray. "It's a sentient army. The humans aren't victims of these microbes. They are the commanders. They have tamed the most lethal organisms in the galaxy and forced them into a state of perpetual combat. Their bodies are 4.5 billion years of concentrated biological spite." The horror intensified when they reached the hospital cafeteria. They witnessed a nurse eating a container of Greek yogurt. Xylos 4's sensors nearly melted. She is intentionally a concentrated colony of lactobacillus. She is reinforcing her internal legion. They don't just carry the plague, they eat it to gain its power. They are making demonic pacts with the rot. The final revelation came when they attempted to sanitize a sample of human blood. They hit it with a standard Xylos sterilization beam, a blast of radiation that should have turned any organic matter into inert ash. The human blood didn't die. The white blood cells, sensing a thermal intrusion, entered a state of hyper-aggressive cytokine storm. They didn't just resist the radiation. They began to adapt, their molecular structures shifting in real time to absorb the energy. To the Gorgos, it looked like the blood was learning how to kill them. "Admiral Vrax was wrong," Xylos 4 whispered, backing away from the petri dish as it began to hiss with microscopic activity. "We didn't land on a planet of dirty primitives. We landed on a planet of biological gods. Every human is a walking fortress, a sovereign nation of trillions of soldiers that have spent an eternity perfecting the art of survival." He looked at the small boy, Tommy, who had just let out a sleepy, wet cough. "If even one of these children ever reached our homeworld, Xyl 4 concluded. They wouldn't need a fleet. They wouldn't need a single bomb. They would just need to exist near us. And our entire civilization would be digested before we could even scream. The Gorgos scientists didn't wait for orders. They fled the hospital, leaving behind their equipment, which was already being reclaimed by the local biofilm, a thin layer of earthly bacteria that was already starting to eat the alien plastic. The realization didn't hit the United Terran Coalition, UTC, all at once. It trickled in through the reports of melting alien armor, dissolving commandos, and the sight of 1,000-ship armada fleeing Earth because a sergeant sneezed in the general direction of their vanguard. By the time the Gorgos Science Division's abandoned equipment was analyzed, the truth was undeniable. Humanity was the galaxy's most efficient chemical weapon. In the underground bunkers of Geneva, President Elena Vance looked at the red list of alien leaders who had authorized the Sol containment mesh. She didn't call for a nuclear strike. She didn't order the launch of the orbital railguns. Instead, she turned to her chief of protocol. "Send them a gift," Vance said, her voice carrying a dry, dangerous wit. "Something traditional. Something that says, we want to be your friends. But also, we can melt your civilization with a firm pat on the back." The gift basket ultimatum. The Galactic Council was in the middle of debating a planetary decontamination strike, glassing Earth from a safe distance, when a single human shuttle bypassed the containment mesh. It didn't use stealth. It didn't use shields. It broadcasted a loop of upbeat 1950s elevator music and a message of humanitarian cooperation. The shuttle didn't land. It deployed a single pressurized container via a low-velocity parachute into the center of the High Purifier's private garden on the capital world of Xylos Prime. Inside the container was a standard human welcome to the neighborhood basket, a jar of unpasteurized wildflower honey, a loaf of aged sourdough bread, the yeast bomb, a handwritten note from President Vance, signed with a fountain pen, laden with skin oils, a small fuzzy teddy bear, a fungal vector, the Great Panic. When the Xylos biodetectors scanned the basket, the capital city's AI went into an immediate, irreversible nervous breakdown. The detectors didn't see food. They saw a multi-stage invasion force. The honey, it contains botulism spores in a state of suspended animation. The High Purifier shrieked over the emergency broadcast. The bread is a living, breathing fungal colony. The teddy bear is a porous trap designed to harbor billions of dust mites. It is a biological Trojan horse. Before the Xylos could incinerate the basket, a transmission from Earth appeared on every screen in the hegemony. President Vance sat in her office, looking remarkably healthy, and therefore remarkably terrifying. "We noticed you've been a bit distant lately," Vance said, a small, polite smile on her face. "We thought you might be feeling under the weather. We'd love to send more of these friendship packages to every core world in the hegemony. In fact, we have 10,000 foreign aid ships fueled and ready to go. They aren't armed with missiles, Admiral. They are armed with freshly baked cookies and hand-knitted sweaters. The terms of surrender." The threat was clear. Humanity didn't need to fire a single shot. If they simply opened the doors and started sending humanitarian aid to the sterile, defenseless galaxy, the galactic hegemony would cease to exist within a month. Their purity was their greatest weakness, and the humans were the masters of the stain. The Council didn't even try to negotiate. They couldn't. Every diplomat who had been near Captain Volkov was already in a permanent biostasis chamber, and the Gorgos fleet was currently being scuttled because they couldn't figure out how to kill the black mold growing in their reactor coolant. "What are your terms?" High Purifier Sran asked, his voice shaking. "It's simple," Vance replied. "Dismantle the Sol containment mesh immediately. Establish a buffer zone of 10 light-years around human space. Humanity will provide security services for the galaxy." "Security?" Sran clicked. "Against what?" "Against anything else that comes from the dark," Vance said, her smile fading into something ancient and predatory. "The universe is a dirty, messy place, Purifier. You've spent eons hiding in your sterile bubbles, but we were born in dirt. We know the things that live there. And if you want to survive them, you're going to need a few monsters on your side." The Galactic Hegemony surrendered that afternoon. They didn't sign the treaty with a pen. They were too afraid of the ink. They authorized it via a remote, triple-encrypted digital yes. Humanity had won the war without ever leaving their atmosphere, The walking biohazard was now the galactic sheriff, and all it took was a wicker basket and the threat of a hug. The transition from galactic pariah to galactic protector happened with the kind of irony that only human history could produce. The Galactic Hegemony, once obsessed with the sanctity of the sterile, had discovered a terrifying truth. The universe was not a vacuum-sealed laboratory. Deep in the dark sectors between galaxies, ancient, non-sentient biological horrors, the Creeping Blight, were beginning to wake up. These were organisms that didn't care about lasers or shields. They were hungry, rapidly evolving masses of necrotic tissue that turned entire star systems into gray, lifeless sludge. The Xylos and the Gorgos, with their zero tolerance for impurities, were the first to fall. Their hyper-clean ships were like petri dishes for the Blight. They had no immune response, no concept of biological warfare, and no way to stop a parasite that could rewrite its own DNA in seconds. That was when the first human response force arrived, the Bioshield Protocol. Deep on the edges of the Xylos frontier, a human cruiser named the UTC Pasteur dropped out of warp. It wasn't a sleek, diamond composite mirror ship. It was a rugged, bulky beast of steel and lead, covered in patches of industrial grime, and humming with the sound of a million internal air scrubbers that were currently turned off. "Admiral Saran, stay back." Captain Volkov's voice crackled over the emergency channel. He was now the commander of the Galactic Bioshield. "We've got this. Your ships are too clean to survive this fight. You're like a buffet for these things. We, on the other hand, are a poison pill." The Pasteur didn't fire plasma cannons. It fired spore pods. These were canisters filled with Earth's most aggressive, laboratory-enhanced super fungi and metal-eating bacteria. As the Pasteur plowed into the mass of the Blight, the alien observers watched in horrified fascination. The Blight tried to infect the human ship. It sent out its necrotic tendrils to dissolve the hull. But the moment the Blight touched the Pasteur, it encountered the human microbiome, the dirty oils on the ship's exterior, the trillions of earthborne microbes that humans called dust, and the specially engineered anti-blight yeasts began to feast. The Blight, which had consumed entire civilizations, found itself being eaten by earthly mold. It was a war of the microscopic, and Earth, the veteran of a 4-billion-year-old bloodbath, was winning. "They aren't just fighting it," Saran whispered from his sterile bunker, 10 light-years away. "They are digesting it." The paradox of the Protector. Within a year, the Humanity Exclusion Zone was replaced by Humanity Support Stations. Every major galactic trade route now had a UTC outpost. These stations were still dirty zones, places where the air smelled of ozone, rain, and occasionally frying onions. Alien ships would dock at a distance, sending their automated drones to trade with the humans, who would step out in their biohazard suits, which were actually just standard jeans and t-shirts, to hand over supplies. Humanity had become the Galactic Immune System. The Council species realized that while they could calculate the trajectory of a star or the frequency of a photon, they couldn't survive a single unfiltered day. They needed the walking biohazards to stand between them and the messy, organic chaos of the universe. The final handshake. In the new conference hall of Eternal Accord, the glass barriers were still there, but they were thinner. President Elena Vance stood on one side and High Purifier Saran stood on the other. "We once called your world a mistake," Saran said, his sensory stalks dipping in a gesture of profound respect. "We thought your dirt was a sign of a primitive mind. We realize now that your dirt is your shield. You didn't just survive your planet. You invited it to live inside you." Vance smiled. The same polite, slightly dangerous smile that had once terrified the hegemony. "Nature doesn't like a vacuum purifier. If you don't carry your own monsters with you, the ones outside will eventually find a way in. We just brought our neighbors along for the ride." She held up a small, sealed container. Inside was a single green, budding plant from the Amazon, a gift for the new biological research wing of the Council. "Just remember," Vance added with a wink, "don't open it unless you're prepared to deal with the consequences. It's a bit clingy." The galaxy had finally found its peace, but it was a dirty peace. The stars were no longer sterile, and the silence was no longer absolute. In the dark places of the void where monsters once waited, there was now the smell of peppermint, the sound of a human laugh, and the terrifying, beautiful hum of a species that was simply too messy to die.